Good afternoon, everyone. Warm welcome from all of us here. This Certes are putting on another lunchtime webinar, so hopefully while you're relaxing, eating your sandwiches, you can listen in and just like I think the Americans call it, a lunch and learn. So we've got a great topic and some really, really cool guests. And as always, as you guys are watching, if you want to post anything into the chat, I'll do my best to keep an eye on that and bring those questions in. But basically today, and thanks for registering and joining, and some of you might be watching this on the sort of the playback. This will be recorded. But we're going to be discussing user research, breaking the barriers through the power of user research. And so, you know, I'm wondering, is there anything you can't apply to user research to? And why are we actually so interested in user research? So I've already had a really good session with Nick for those of you that follow the episodes, but we thought we'd bring this out into a webinar with some more experts. And just a kind of really quick kind of recap as to why you might be very interested in the next hour is, you know, it can help us understand the needs of customers, stakeholders, and then how you develop effective solutions for those needs. So that's pretty much the entire purpose of you know, from the soup to nuts as for software development, for example. But I believe you can also apply it to other things like tenders, maybe even to software as a service. I'd be really interested if the panelists at some point tell me what you can't use it for, and also maybe what the strangest thing that you could use it for. That would be quite interesting. You can use it to identify risks. You can make sure your solutions are cost effective. There's all sorts of places, ways that you can apply to use it. And I'm sure it's going to be one of those tools that's very powerful and needs to be wielded carefully. And there will no doubt be some ethical considerations and some context. So that's enough from me, as they say. I want to get on to our great guests. So we've got three guests, which I'm just going to introduce. And then ask you guys to just give a very quick heads up of, you know, why you're on the call and your kind of your interests, and then we'll get stuck into some topics. So in no particular order, but if I could start with Dr. Barbara Clark. Barbara, would you like to just give us a little intro, please?
Hello, lovely to be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Barbara, and I am currently head of user experience at a startup called Sprite. You may hear it sounds rather North American in my voice. That's because I spent quite a lot of time in Yankee Doodle Land, aka Detroit and United States. I am a British citizen and have been here 20 years, so happy to talk about cricket and snooker. And I have a PhD in linguistics and anthropology, and also a keen background in aviation. So I am very, very passionate about user experience, and I hate bad technology.
Brilliant. And so we'll also keep an eye out, Barbara, for questions in the comments about cricket. I wouldn't be able to answer those, so we'll definitely pass those in your direction. Okay, so just in the order they're appearing on my screen, at least, is Dr. Nick Fine. Am I correct?
Yep.
Nick, we met already. We did a previous a session about a month ago. But for those of folks who are new to the webinar, do you want to just give us a little intro, please?
Sure. I'm a kind of 20-plus year UX professional, been actually in practice for probably about 12 or 13 years now, continuously. I'm a practitioner. Unlike some of the other people on the call, I'm not like that kind of leadership level. I've been actually on the practitioner level, so my perspective is very much on the ground, sleeves rolled up, getting stuff done. I'm the founder of UX Psychology. I'm a very passionate advocate for science and psychology within UX, and actually within the wider digital sphere. And Barbara, we're going to ask you later on if you can explain the offside rule in football.
Okay, so some really, really challenging questions are coming up, clearly. And also, I'd just like to say, before I introduce, come over to Ren, Nick, I liked your LinkedIn strapline, as it were, which was still better than AI. Yeah, I think that's a really topical point. So Ren, thank you very much, Ren Reynolds. joining us. Ren, would you like to give everyone just a quick pencil in of your background and why you're here?
Yes, I am not a UX person. I do all kinds of things like product, commercial, and things like that. But I tend to be one of the interfaces between UX and either the client organization, the host organization. So I tend to be a person who's either putting together strategies or things like that. I'm working with people who have, at best, little idea about agile and user research, and at worst, completely the wrong idea about agile and user research. So I tend to be a translator, and I try to be often an organizational champion for the role of user research, as a user researcher is an actual champion for the user.
Brilliant. So I think we've got a really good mix of folks here. So just straight off, I would like to ask Barbara, and Barbara sometimes referred to as Dr. B. That's the thing. It's on LinkedIn, but we'll say Barbara. Be polite. Barbara, can you give me an example of, in your career and everything you just described there, where user research very dramatically changed a design or an implementation of a system or a product or a service? Some kind of light bulb moment, or is, in your experience, have you always been there from the beginning? You've never kind of done that kind of intervention piece. So just trying to throw that in as a question.
Well, I think I would be surprised if user research doesn't provide any light bulb moments in any project I've been in. I have to say, sometimes there's a disconnect between the user experience team or the user researcher and the rest of the team, and that's where a researcher really comes into their own by being sort of confident, passionate, forthright, and proactive. Certainly when I was working on the, quite a large project, actually we can go before that, I was working in HMCTS, which is Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service, in a digital transformation of the judiciary, and it was insight after insight after insight. So much so that we had regular playbacks with the rest of the team. So there was a lot of research happily underpinning what was being developed. And then more recently, I should say, with DVSA, I had the privilege of working on the book a theory test, the theory test booking journey, where we did a huge amount of research with users with accessibility needs, including a couple of rounds of with users who are deaf and on the deaf spectrum, just to, make the service as accessible as possible. The last round of research I did on that was with users who had requested and received a very high level of support from DVSA, which was absolutely groundbreaking to help the client and the rest of the team understand just the extent to which that these folks had accessibility needs, and how DVSA and the service could support them in any and every way. I had the privilege of doing a research playback to the team in DVSA who provide that support on the theory test itself. So I was able to kind of not just help users, but sort of spread the word about how important user research and insights from research can be, not just for a very specific thing, but broadly speaking across the service or an organization.
Cool. Thanks, Barbara. Nick, I'm going to ask you in a second, but something you said right at the start, Barbara, that made me think of what Ren had said at the start. Ren, you were talking about being this kind of person who's trying to communicate, translate between different groups to understand, who does what and where. And I think, Barbara, you said at the start that, so when Ren said that, I was thinking more about between, okay, I'm going to just draw a really clumsy barrier, but between technology and business, that kind of translation. But I think what you just said, Barbara, is that there are some technical folks in the team who don't understand user research. So the user researcher who joins the team has actually got a really big job to do, because they're also explaining their professional value, for want of a better phrase, to the rest of the technologists. So Ren, is that something you recognise? Is that what's the downside of that if you don't address it? You know, what does that lead to?
Oh, well, I think that, I mean, both the team in and of itself and sort of the wider group can so easily just negate the role and value of user research. I have a slide, I have a presentation I give to people where I have a whole slide of red flags, and one of those is either business or technology basically saying, we don't need you, we know what the user wants, so why are you even saying this thing? Or I've seen again, and there's a sort of thing which, if it can't get unstuck, I tend to have to escalate with management, where you have people who are emotionally wedded to a certain type of solution, and I've had specific cases of this where user research has completely confounded that solution, so that's not what users want at all, and people go, well, they're wrong. That is what users want.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite a challenging set of things to get, and I think we all recognise it as well. I think the other thing is that maybe folks don't even have the user research light switched on, so they don't even know they're doing this. It's so sort of ingrained. Anyway, Nick had to sort out some tech or move or something. He's back now, and I want to ask you, Nick, because I don't think I asked you this one when we met last month, but can you think of a big turning point and where you brought in UX and it kind of switched the lights on, that sort of thing?
Sure. There's a very specific example of, I'm not going to name names or even sectors. Large-ish £5 million project running. It was about a year, 18 months in, when they did a discovery. They did a discovery with the product manager, a delivery lead, and some other people who are not user researchers. It obviously was not a good discovery. It was a very bad discovery. They did all the red flag stuff probably that Ren is talking about, right? Lots and lots of, finding what you're looking for type stuff. I was brought in about 18 months later. The long story short was, what I discovered was, we were asking people to nominate an administrator to be like the point person internally for this new service. But the research showed very clearly absolutely nobody wanted to do that. No one's got time for it. No one's paid for it. It's additional job description, all of that good stuff. And it fundamentally changed because we had designed a system that was administrator based. And we had to come up with a brand new way of authenticating users if we haven't got a trusted user at that side. And that was a massive, massive piece of insight. It caused massive shenanigans. And kind of the parable or the moral from that story is do a proper discovery. Don't get amateurs or non-researchers to do it and then worry about it a year later and many, many millions of pounds worth of lost time and money. User research, it kind of triggers me a bit, the discussion we've been having already, because we're talking about it like it's this optional thing and like why you should be doing it and why we should be selling it. It's basically you should be fired if you're not doing it. And if you're not doing it well enough. I mean, because, without eyes and ears, what are you doing with either public or private money is wholly irresponsible. Wholly irresponsible.
Yeah.
You heard it here first,
honestly,
everyone.
User research is so cheap compared with the mistakes that you can make, like you said. It's like, it's a fraction. It can save you hundreds of millions of pounds.
And reputation and shenanigans and cost and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Okay, well then I think you're going to find the next question quite difficult to answer. Pause for dramatic effect. So is there any scenario where you don't use user research, where you'd say, do you know what? And I've been thinking about this because I'm thinking you guys aren't going to come up with one. So I've done a bit of research and I've thought of possibly one which I think you'll end up beating me into a pulp over, but just for the sake of discussing the topic, is there any area that you guys can think of actually I wouldn't go there with user research? Nick, you're nodding.
Yeah, I can, and I'm going to caveat this very heavily because there's a lot of misconception around innovation and user research and top down and bottom up and all of that stuff. There are some very unique cases or very, let's say, edgy cases where you are often doing a very technical or very innovative thing, and the user research part is coming later in the day. But that's a very, 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 like 0.01% of all the projects type thing. You know that horrible cliche of people asking for more horses, they're wanting faster cars or that stuff, right? It's, there's some of that going on, but even under those circumstances, you do stealth user research, or, you know what I mean? You do it under a different brand, or there's loads of ways of doing that without giving your market lead away or any kind of intellectual property. But there are a couple of instances, but like I say, they're super rare, and I'm hesitant to offer them up because people will then start to think, oh, I can do that because I'm being really innovative, therefore I can cut user research out. It's super unique, and I would imagine most people in their working lives probably won't experience that.
Great, thanks, Nick. Barbara, you're in agreement? Have you thought of any builds on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting what you said, Nick, because it's like, yeah, there are a couple of rare instances, but then you mentioned doing stealth user research. So really, we are doing user research, just maybe not like explicitly. So I really was trying to problematize in my head, like, is there a case? And I can't, if there are users of a service or a product, then you really need to understand how users, like what they need, what's the problem now, what they expect, what will solve their problem, what they will not just need if if you have the budget and, the desire and the, staff, what they want too, like what can make them happier, what can improve their lives. I mean, I can think of an example. There was there's a service I'm still working on, but some back end, like, database build was done. It was like, oh, no, that's fine. We can build this. We don't need the research yet. It's fine. And would you believe, user research, after some research was done, showed that what was built was not really fit for the service. So there's a very good example of, that cost. Well, I'm not sure if it was the supplier or the client, but it cost a few £100,000 because of that. Because as we know, development is really costly. Like,
yes,
research
absolutely.
is so cheap.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot. Ren, I want your view as a sort of the critique and the person that's using these services and trying to deliver the mix. Do you agree that we have user research in nearly all cases, or do you make exceptions?
I probably have a practical and philosophical answer to that. The practical answer, I agree with Nick. So a thing I've done is I have invented a bunch of things, and in the very initial ideation stage, I don't care about user research or what people want or think they need or anything. All I care about is what I think a possible future should look like, and how that might change the world and change the way that people think. But whenever I do that, as Nick referenced before, I always then go into top-down and bottom-up analysis on all kinds of things, in terms of the business model and things like that, of just going, well, this is what my gut tells me. Now, looking from the bottom up, can I then build up to that and meet in the middle from, does user research or do analogues of user research tell me that this is kind of valid? The more philosophical question is one of categories and reduction. And what I mean by that is that, and there's a practical problem. Well, there's a practical challenge here, and that's the thing of being reductive. So, a service or a product is an entire thing, but it's made up of a bunch of other things, which may themselves be supported services and things like that. Ultimately, which come down to an individual line of code. So you don't user research a line of code. You do user research the service. And I think a problem, and I think this is the thing that probably Barb and Nick think about a bit, is to what degree of reduction of, say, like individual function or feature or button or subcomponent do I actually do some research on? Where do I stop? How small do I get? When does it stop being useful as an item of research in and of itself? And you go, oh no, I have to combine these things into some kind of they only come together at a certain point and make an actual user experience. And I don't know if that's something that when you're doing user research planning, you have to think about how small do I go, how big do I go? Is it too big? Is it the whole service that could just confused? I don't know. I don't do this work.
Typically, I'm going to put words into Barbara's mouth, so I'm sorry, Barbara, but I'm going to speak for both of us because we're both ex-government contractors, so there's a level of standardization going on here. But generally speaking, and I am speaking generally, Ren, we're testing journeys. So what's the outcome? What are they trying to achieve? And then watching the needs and the pain points being met on that journey in the context of the thing that they're trying to do. Very generally speaking. Sometimes it's much more kind of micro, like this drop list is a problem and there's an interaction design issue and blah, blah, it's all to do with timings and that kind of stuff. Sometimes it is that, and it's laser-like focused and you can get in and out quite quickly, a 15-minute session kind of thing. But there's others where you're like, oh, okay, tell me about the challenges at that point. What other parties are involved? What other systems are involved? And all the stuff that breaks or that creates the pain. So it's I'd say probably 80% of the time I'm probably journey testing. Like I mean that's a kind of rule of thumb. Generally, it's like onboarding journey, checkout journey, reserve a room journey, buy the ketchup journey. I don't know, whatever that journey is. That kind of stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think I've got a case for you guys where you don't use user research, and you do it where you don't have any users. I just applied my computer science logic brain to it. So you'll probably tell me, well, there aren't many cases where you don't have users. You might have, an initial thing that hasn't got a user, but it will have an impact on a user. And then on the innovation piece that you both picked up on, because obviously it's one of the first things that comes up when you're kind of looking at this about where you might not use it. For me, it just seemed like, well, it wasn't really a case of not using it. It's just more about timing. There is when Ren was talking about inventing, he had one user. It was him. He was just researching it, and then obviously he's then projecting it and then looking at what it could be. So, obviously when you first come up with an idea, I think it's just all very, very obvious. But I think my next question, which is really where I'd like to ask you guys something I'm professionally interested in. So, Barbara, you said software development's really expensive, and boy, oh boy, it really is. And you guys know that, and certainly if you've been involved in really big public sector projects, it's eye-wateringly expensive. But in the private sector, I've done public sector, but private sector as well, people don't realise you get started on something, you've got all the annual maintenance over the top of it, and then there's the are you even good enough to be able to write it, and then all these other elements that you need to get right. So one of the things that is kind of coming in is to say, well, instead of writing software, let's go and look in the marketplace and buy something that we think's a really good fit, software as a service, as it's called. And so suddenly you're now in the space of configuring, you're also in the space of selecting systems, that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering whether you could explain how user research could be put in that capacity, where actually Ren's point about going into changing a button, you might not be able to do that, but there's probably a huge amount of config that you can do, and I'd just be really interested in it, because I think buying software as a service is still, it's still in its infancy. It's probably 10 years old or whatever. It's still got a lot of learning to do on it, and I think we don't apply all the same rigor that we do when we're writing software. So that's something I think might resonate with folks who are watching this, who might not have the budgets to do a 4-year massive transformational software development piece. And actually what they're doing is they're thinking, what CRM system are we going to buy? I'm just trying to bring it into that kind of level. So what's the difference, when you're moving into that space?
So I have actually been on projects where we have brought something in, like an existing CRM or other piece of software, and modified it as much as possible. But it still goes back to the basics of understanding who are your users, what do they need? Where are they going to use this thing? What is it like now? Is it noisy? Is it dusty? Is it loud? Do they have to come back and forth? And should it auto save and all the rest of it? Like, what do they actually need from this thing that you are forcing them to use or asking them to use? And what do you want them to provide to make your life as an admin, as a organization, as a, I don't know, fraud management organization? Like, what do you need from them, and how can you make it easier? Because that's going to benefit you as well. So there are certainly, you need to also understand, you need to work with the tech team and other team members to sort of understand what can be configured, because you can do the research and have a whole list of things that users need, but if it can't be changed, then it kind of helps prepare the user or the researcher in a research session. Because you can, I don't know, it helps you gather the information and present it back to the team in a way that makes it more manageable, and you can build a research backlog and therefore a product backlog. So I think it's you still do the same research. You just sort of tweak it a little bit based on expectations.
And Barbara, do you kind of come across some symmetry where the product you're looking at clearly had user research done to it, or products that you're looking at clearly didn't have user research? Can you, I think we can all kind of, I've never thought of it like that before, but now I'm thinking, when you open up certain software, you think, wow, this had no, this is a very tech, based. So it's interesting. So a quick question for you guys. They talk about having an emotional attachment to software. Like people love Apple. Other products are available. I'm sure some people love Microsoft. I don't want to kind of get into that, but that's that kind of connection you get with a bit of software that you use. I'm just wondering whether that connection's coming because that did come from a user research basis. It's just got that really strong, I can't quite put my finger on it, but I just love the way it works. Is that the magic of user research working its way in the background, or is that just brilliant design? Or is it just a huge marketing budget that
There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. There's a large element of marketing in there, at least in the Apple scenario, right? As a UX person, there's some... Oh, someone's cat is interested.
That's Barbara's cat.
Yeah.
Making a quick appearance. There,
very nice.
There he is, or she. Cool.
Sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
You're saying marketing. If that was marketing,
marketing alone isn't going to do it, obviously, and the actual user experience of the thing itself is a thing. And obviously the two completely interact. When it comes to... sorry, I've lost my train of thought here. Marketing.
We were just talking about whether user research, when you get an emotional attachment with software...
Oh, that's it.
And maybe it's just me. I'm the only person who gets that. But is it user research working its magic, or is it something else? It's
not necessarily that. Apple makes a ton of very bad UX fails or sins, right? But we kind of overlook them because it looks nice, it feels nice, it's nicely designed, the keystrokes have got a haptic quality to them, all kinds of things. So the answer is it's everybody's messy in that there's an interaction between marketing and the actual thing, and often marketing overrides the actual thing, or vice versa. Like, you told me this, but you lied because it performs like this. For me, I think the most engagement or the most kind of passion you get is when you start solving people's needs or problems. Right? When you get rid of those pain points, then people love the thing.
Yes. Yeah, and then you have that situation, Nick, where you have what we call first world problems, where the software is actually solving a need that you didn't realize was a problem in the first place. I think the first world problem I ever heard was someone complaining that an iPad wasn't waterproof, so they couldn't take it into the shower. I was going, that's a really pressing problem to resolve. If you don't mind, I was going to move on to another question and actually ask this to Ren. So
could I address the last one, though?
Of course, Ren, go for it.
So there's a lot. So whenever you look at software as a service, and I'd say software as a service is very old. I'd say it's 60-ish, 65 years old now. Started with IBM Bureau Services. When I was at BT, 95, created software rental services, client server rental. So we've got a lot of history in it. And you always get the same thing. So generally speaking, software as a service, you can manipulate in some degree. But it's that to some degree. And that that degree means there's going to be compromise, and it's the area I think you most often see scope creep and cost creep. So generally speaking, you get an 80-20 rule. You get a piece of software out of a box. If you want to change it a bit, it'll save you 80% of the time, only cost you 20% of the cost. Almost certainly, that won't meet user needs. And you will have user researchers going, yeah, but that doesn't meet the needs. It needs to do this, that, and the other. And generally speaking, taking a software as a service software and then manipulating it to the degree that meets all the user needs and wants costs more than just building the thing yourself in the first place. So you often get in an embattled situation, and it's not the user researchers' fault because they're there to find out what the users actually need. But I have to constantly remind the business, you went down this path because you made a decision. You decided that you were going to do compromises. Well, these are some of the compromises. But then you tend to get into the kind of like the issues of, well, we've spent so much so far. I can't remember the name of the paradox now, but the paradox of, we've spent X amount of money so far, we can't stop now. And they end up sort of reinventing it. And then it makes it harder and harder for themselves because often the underlying architecture doesn't support what they're doing, and it just goes on. And I've seen so many projects just spiral into a chasm because of that.
So so taking Ren's point there, do you guys in user research have to be really careful that you don't become people pleasers? And I'll explain what I mean by that, because actually user research, I suppose, is pleasing people. Yeah, users are people. So but go with me here, right? I have no idea why I got this advert on my phone. It was clearly a mistake, but Bentley are doing a bespoke car. They're making 10. I don't know if you saw this. I mean, it's outrageous. They cost £2 million each. So I don't need one of those, but I might say I want one. You know, from a user research point of view, I could say that's what I want. I want a custom car. I want it absolutely as But the compromise that Ren was talking about is actually, you might say, well, actually, John, that 1.3 litre Polo that you bought your son, that's fine. That'll get you, that's good enough. And look at how much money you're going to save. So how do you get that balance in? Because there is sometimes I find when you're working with, especially with large populations, there's this sort of momentum that builds up about requirements, and you can't kind of stop it. And suddenly you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, we're going to end up in the Bentley space if we're not careful. I mean, I've just made up the Bentley space because it was from an ad I saw yesterday, but you know what I mean. So how do you guys balance that? I'm not going to say it is genuine people pleasing because that's not what we mean, but needs and wants, I suppose, is the marketing term. How do you balance that? Anyone want to have a go? Barbara, do you want to try that one?
I mean, you gave a classic example that I often give, the difference between a user need and a user want, because I find that a lot of people don't understand the difference. And so I think this is where appropriate user research comes in. It actually is quite a confluence, forgive the term, but a confluence of a team working together to understand business requirements, what product people need, technical capabilities, and from a user research perspective or a UX perspective, who are the users? Like, how wide are the users? What's the broad cohort or population? And what is the minimum level of need that we need to satisfy? What goes from a need to a want? And that's, we're doing appropriate number of user research, researching with an appropriate number of users and rounds of research, playing that back to the team, getting their insight, being a very collaborative team, and playing back to the client and having the client understand, look, this is what we're learning with research in research sessions. Tell me again, working with the BA and the product person to understand business requirements, capabilities, policy, if you're working in a public sector project. And this is also where I think private sector and public sector might have a bit of a tension or a bit of a difference, because with public sector projects, that's all of our money. So you really want to be careful with the money that you spend. With private sector, it's slightly different because we're talking about profit and making people happy and all the rest of it. So you can delight and surprise, to use a term that's often bandied about. I would have to say the DPD app is quite delightful sometimes, with their funny icons and all the rest of it. I'd be interested in hearing, Nick, your take on this.
Yeah, so, I mean, I am a people pleaser for lots of different reasons, but with a professional capacity hat on, I'm definitely not a people pleaser. My definition of people pleasing is keeping my stakeholders and everybody else happy. That doesn't necessarily mean telling them what they want. It means telling them what they need to know. And that may often or usually flies in the face of preconceptions or expectations. That's why URs, user researchers, generally, we're not like the most popular people in the world because we're business consultants. And sometimes we say things that you don't want to hear or don't want to know. But that's what's good for maturity. That's what's good for the business. A product manager would much rather me say, the evidence doesn't support that, don't do that, bad idea, than me going, yeah, go ahead and do it. And then they get crucified by the CTO or whoever it was that's going to, you know what I mean? So that's where I'm at on that, really. It's more business.
You've got to be responsible. It's a responsible role.
Oh, can I just add one quick thing, though? Just to tag on to what Barbara was saying. In the private sector, there isn't anywhere near the level of accountability for ROI, for example. And so people do some really silly things. They don't get in trouble with it, shall we say, and they just go ahead and do it again. And then you end up with these serial offenders. And that's that's the marketplace, unfortunately.
And I think that's a really good point. Hang on just a second, Ren, because Nick reminded me of a point that I wanted to make, which was, you have to be true to what users say and the evidence and the insight that you get from research. So it's not like you're delivering this bad message and you are delivering this message that maybe stakeholders don't want to hear, but all you have to do is back it up with look, we talked to this many people, these were their backgrounds, this was the round of research, we all agreed that this was going to be the focus of this round of research. These are the raw notes. You can go and look at them for yourself. So transparency is really key for this. And say, these are the insights that I came up with. You do several research playbacks with your UX team, with your product team, and then with maybe wider stakeholders, and then in a show and tell. And it's like, well, this is the evidence. This is where I got this information from. So let's talk about maybe why users might be saying this. And then let's talk about how we can address maybe some discrepancies or some gaps between what users said and what you as a client or stakeholders want or think you need to hear.
And just a last point. It's not the user researchers. Sorry, I don't think user researchers should hold back. It's not their job. It's product. So the user researcher may come and go, right, we have validated there are 10 user needs. We've chosen software as a service. This software as a service will only meet 9 of them. Fine. That's my job as a product and management to go, look, we did a business case. It's going to save us 10 million quid. So actually, we've saved 10 million quid and we're not meeting what we know is a genuine user need. Fine. That's just how it is. That's the decision we made as an organization. Okay, what do we do with that unmet need? But it's not the user researcher's job ever to kind of compromise on that or in any way. They should deliver what they research.
Cool. Barbara, I think you just got into it with your previous answer, but I just want to make sure we've got it covered. I think this is maybe more relevant in a public-facing services, but your user is the citizen. Nick and I were talking about this in the last piece. Generally, I know you've got internal users as well, but let's just say you're designing a public service. It's the user is really the citizen in this example. So there are just hundreds of different types of citizens. There's lots of different interests. How do you avoid getting bias, unconscious bias, or any kind of bias into the research? Because I would have thought that's a big challenge. And Ren's face tells me he might want to comment on this as well. So maybe we'll get Barbara first, and then across to
Ren. So there's Nick, you definitely will have opinions on this. There's a part of central government, a part of the Cabinet Office is the Government Digital Service. There is a split now between Government Digital Service, or GDS, and something called CDDO.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, there's a standard across central government for public sector services or services funded by public sector money, which is called the service standard. And that's it's just basically like, this is what you need to do, and this is how you do agile and research and build publicly funded government services. And it's a minimum standard to which publicly funded services have to comply, adhere to, follow, etc. Ostensibly. We're not at the pub, so we can't really talk about what really happens sometimes. But anyway, there's a standard, and in that standard, which happily GDS has done tons of research on these methodologies, there's a sort of set number of people that you should research with in a round of research. They say between 4 and 8, which from an academic perspective, I have to say, when I finished my PhD and then I sort of read about the GDS, like how many people to research with in a round of research, I was shocked, I tell you, shocked. How do you know? How is 4 people only?
Yeah.
WTF?
Well, that doesn't even line up with just basic statistical sampling, or that's you're just going to get any road. I think we're all in agreement.
Yes.
That's a very, it's almost like they've missed a couple of noughts off the end, maybe.
Well, especially for a service of like 2+ million. Go ahead, Nick. You want to? You're frothing.
No. This is all good stuff. I had the same epiphany as you, Barbara. There's one page that says until you're confident, and that might be 2 users. I think it actually says, and it blows my mind. We know that that's wrong. It's dated 2014. It's historical. It needs updating. However, we were talking about earlier about stakeholders not listening to what we're saying. And in too many cases, you'll say, I did this work with 2 groups of 5, 10 people, and 80% of them all saying don't do a thing. But they'll go, I'm a CMO. 10 people is nothing. Come back when you've done 2,000 or 200 or something at a market research kind of a scale. And there's this massive disconnect or misconception of what user research is and the scale that we work at. We're not market research. And that's why a lot of people often kind of discount what we're saying, because they go, oh, it's small sample stuff, it's garbage. And they're just fundamentally missing the point. Just to come back to your original question, John, just to keep us kind of on track. The bias thing, obviously us as researchers, we are constantly trying to minimize the bias in our own behavior through standardization and just behavioral stuff. But sample sizes and repeat samples is what genuinely or generally what keeps us all safe. 5, 5, 5, 5. You keep doing 5 or 8 person samples until you plateau the insight. You're not learning anything new. Cool. Larger sample will rule out all those kind of shenanigans or nuances that you may have introduced.
And I think also supporting qualitative research with quantitative data analysis. In fact, oftentimes, sometimes, qualitative research and rounds of research and research questions are underpinned and sort of motivated by a good analysis of what's your quantitative stuff, what's Google Analytics saying, where are people dropping off? Well, that's probably a really good place to start and look for, why are people dropping off this page? They start the journey and then 80% of the people just disappear. Why is that? Well, let's look at that page. Let's put it in front of maybe, 5 or 10 users and see what they have to say from different backgrounds, different accessibility needs. Because, it could be the case that people who are dyslexic don't understand a huge block of 200 words, for an example.
Yeah. Ren, you were waiting patiently. Did you want to comment, to come in on that?
Oh, yes. I thought
So
another side of my life is I've spent many years writing about ethics of technology and done a lot of public policy around ethics of technology. And one of the things I'm thinking about a lot at the moment is ethical agile, and specifically how to apply that to artificial intelligence, but not necessarily artificial intelligence, and also how that links with the government methodology. In theory, agile methods should be ethical because you're supposed to go talk to users and things like that. However, when you combine it with user-centered design, that is. However, I'm trying to think of ways to sort of agitate agile and put ethics more either at the center or as a thing which is constantly there. Now, with users and bias, one of the things I'm thinking of, because I'm thinking about lots of like mental exercises and tools and fun things which agile teams can do to help them sort of think about this sort of thing. And particularly with bias, I'm kind of thinking almost of the game of like, well, who's not in the room? Who aren't we talking to? Because a lot of issues that come up are just because people aren't talking to things, not because they've actively excluded someone, but just because they're thinking, just because they haven't thought of them when they're doing it. Because often there's an assumption about what the direct impact of any technology is going to be in a society, but there's not the thought about, well, what's the indirect impacts of it. Often due to budget constraints and things like that, people are looking at, well, what's, who are easiest to access. Now, the classic on that is facial recognition systems. Facial recognition systems have been largely trained on Caucasian faces, so they don't work for non-standard people who probably don't live in Northern California and things like that. And so the simple mental exercise of like, who isn't in the room. And I think the good news for user researchers is I also think that the cohort of people who we should be researching with is going to be, it should be much more expanded to say who's affected by this technology, not who's the direct user of this technology, who is it displaced. So there's lots of things, there's ways of thinking about technology of like, well, what are the potential threats of the technology? I'm kind of thinking about mental exercises of like naming one person in a team each week as the bad actor, where they get to ham it up and play Hamlet badly in stand-ups. But the thing is, I see lots of things going, oh, well, we never thought anyone would use a technology like that. Well, why isn't it someone's job to think, if I was given this technology, what's the most evil thing I could do with it, and who would I do it to? Well, that too is probably somebody who should be in the user research, and it's probably something you should be thinking about. So I suggest everyone in their projects, you play for a week, everyone elect somebody as a bad actor and get them to think of the worst things they can do to whom with that technology.
Sure, that's a really good point. So, Barbara and Nick, any examples of where you've actually come across something that you've created where you think there is a genuine ethical consideration? Something that could be used in the wrong way.
I've done all kinds of bad shit for tobacco, oil, pharma, blood diamonds. We've all worked for those mining companies, and those guys, they're all. This is a tricky area because as user researchers,
you've answered it by what sectors you've worked in, but I meant literally looking at a piece of technology and saying, actually, that could be used in a way that could screen people. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up now, but you've got a system, it's meant to route people very quickly from A to B, let's say. But actually, you realise that the algorithm, the way it's been put together, it could actually just screen people. They'll never get there. They never get through in the first place because it could be sort of turned on its head. There's some sort of work allocation design going on at the moment, which is meant to remove unconscious bias. So you can allocate work based on skill sets. You don't know the name of the person you're allocating to. You don't know anything other than their skill set. That technology can just be flipped. It can be flipped to be the don't give it to this person with this characteristics. That's not how it's written. But it's those sorts. I'm just wondering whether you guys see any stuff, because Ren, it is news to me that SaaS is 65 years old, but I'm taking that from you. I'm going to take that and I'm going to write that down in my book. I did computer science not 100 years ago, but quite a long time ago, and I studied ethics because apparently it's not done anymore. And I'm absolutely shocked that when you do a computer science degree, you don't do ethics. For me, that is really surprising. I also did, it wasn't called UX, but it was the user interface design stuff, keep things in groups of 7 and, that kind of interface stuff, but not as deep as this. But I think I take the ethical side extremely seriously. And actually, it's only a few of us when we're looking at things from a very privileged position of the project where we're able to get that insight you're talking about, Ren. Because I think some people don't see it because they can't, they're looking up at the wrong angle. They can't actually see what could happen. But we're all in the position, I think. Sorry, I wasn't for a second saying that I'm a user researcher. I'm feeling a connection. But as a CIO, I can see stuff and go, oh, that's problematic. AI is a really, really good example, or machine learning, and that's another topic.
I'm currently working on a proposal. So the government has a business case 5-case model, and I'm having a proposal that it should be a 6-case model, and ethics should be one of those cases. So an example I can think of, which isn't kind of an evil thing per se, but it's a stopping gaming the system for a bad public outcome, I was kind of product manager for creation of a public sector framework called G-Cloud, which is turned out one of the biggest tech frameworks that there is. And one of the innovations of that was a search system, and one of the initial ideas was that the results of the search would be alphabetical, which immediately thought, well, if I'm a bad actor, I'll just call my company AA Aardvark, or I'll put A in front of all my things. Now, there's an ethical thing of that in that people's bias is to only to look for a certain length of a search, so the companies at the top would get a preference. So I think my initial idea with that was we simply randomise the search, but then people were, well, that would be a bad UI experience. I can't remember what we ended up doing in version 1 yet, but that was one of the things where I kind of put my hat on as a bad actor and just thought, how can I game this system for my advantage and the public's disadvantage?
Ren, I think that's such a good example. Because think of all search engines. They talk about if you don't appear above the fold, if you're not in the first 5, forget it. Doesn't matter if you're 50th, it doesn't matter. And you think of all the effort and money that goes into appearing in that group. And then I suppose being a procurement system, you want to give everyone a fair shot. So it is ethical. It's also a big conundrum, isn't it, as to how to approach it. So,
yes, because users expect search results to be alphabetical. Sorry to jump in, but I experienced this when I was at, they've changed their name now, but Department for International Trade, or DIT. There was a thing we were working on where users would search, and these were internal, like civil servant users, would search for something, an organization, and get back hundreds, tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of results. And it was how to order those, because they had to be presented in a way that didn't advantage things that started at the top of an alphabet, the Roman alphabet, so A. So that was a conundrum we had, because of course, users expect things either to be like Google, whereas like the top hit, whatever top hit means, or alphabetical. So it's a tricky one that we never really solved.
Actually, if you look at Google, and particularly YouTube, if you do a search on YouTube and you get the most popular video, it's not the most popular video. And if you look at the terms of service of YouTube, it makes very clear it is the video that they preference. It actually just lies to you, the front page, because YouTube have certain policies about what they want you to see.
Yeah, and that's pretty much happening.
Search results went evil.
Most digital experiences, Sorry, Nick.
Sorry, John. Search results went evil. They did. I mean, they used to be honest responses to a query. Now it's some algorithm-driven thing where you ask it one thing and it tells you something completely different because that's what they want to tell you, and that flies in the face of UX, user centricity fundamentally. But AI is going to fix all of that or make it a lot worse. Yeah.
But people should Google Cory Doctorow's piece on shitification of services.
Yeah.
Cool. Wow. I mean, we got a big topic we could have just stepped into there. I wanted to really kind of go for the. Well, I suppose when I was at school, we were not forced, but we were asked to read newspapers. Yeah. All of them. Yeah. The whole spectrum, and then we were asked, what we thought, and we said, oh well, I didn't realise this had happened, and all the rest of it. And then, one of our teachers just said, just because it's written down, it doesn't mean it happened. And we all had this kind of moment of, really? Because we've been reading books at school and you've been telling us, the opposite. And it's that, I think that is missing a little bit in, you're in the technical moment, you've got the lists being presented to you, being bombarded. Even if you're very stoical about it, you can fall for it. And I suppose that's a big ethical point.
Yeah.
And you're doing your user research in that instance. Are you really meeting the needs of the user, or are you manipulating the user? So interesting.
That's a very quick reflection of the modern world, in that people are much more the editorial control. We used to, in the old days, trust something that had been through if it's been published, it's been through some kind of editorial. Obviously that's all gone now, and you just go straight to the world, and it's causing all kinds of shenanigans.
Cool. Okay, well, look, guys, we've got about 5 minutes to go, and I have got a few other questions, but I don't want to open up a big topic and kind of run out of time. So what I was thinking is I could kind of maybe turn to each of you, and if you think of the folks watching this, some are going to be into user experience, but others are going to be sort of thinking, actually, this sounds interesting. I recognise the gaps that we've got. I recognise a lot of the stories that you've been telling, and I kind of want to know what to do next. So if you think if we've got some folks that are strong converts or want to kind of think, how do I bring this dimension into the work I'm doing? Maybe I could ask each of you for what you'd advise them to do, and then we'll close off after that. So again, just in order of appearance on my screen at least, Barbara, would you like to go first? What sort of advice would you give folks?
I would say to contact a user researcher as soon as possible, just to have a chat about your project. The other thing with user researchers is anything you say to us is confidential. Like, that's a key thing for us. And in fact, anything that happens in a research session is between the researcher and the participant. Obviously, we report findings, but you know what I mean? So have a confidential chat with one of us. I'm sure I'm open to conversations, or any researcher, who's experienced in sort of discovery, pre-discovery. Talk through what your project is. Just have a chat and get the feedback, and don't just take one opinion. Talk to a couple, because I'm telling you, a good user researcher and user research is going to save you. Good user research will save a lot of money, as opposed to not doing any research.
You said that a couple of times. The cost of getting it right at the beginning before you've committed to all the design and the cost and everything else, it's a very compelling business case. Thanks, Barbara. Nick, anything to add to that, or a different twist?
I think it's a really great point that Barbara makes around getting an actual experienced user researcher, because that cost can go the wrong way. It can become a massive cost rather than a benefit if you get somebody who's doing a lot of market research or that kind of a thing, or they haven't got much concern for validity, or they're just not working to user needs, or all of that kind. A survey person, those sorts of people who, The best advice I would give, if you want to get into this, you want to become more user-centric, you want to drive performance and value, is get an experienced user researcher and just do lots of user research regularly. Do it business as usual, and it becomes cultural, it becomes embedded. You will get transformation faster than any other mechanism, in my humble opinion.
Cool. Thank you, Nick. Ren, would you like to give us some final
two quick things. One, to reinforce what Barb says, so there's a person who puts together the numbers, looks at spreadsheets and stuff like that. Relative to the rest of the project, user research is the cheapest thing you're going to do. User research should be so cheap compared to devs at like £1,000 a day and stuff like that, and stuff they create. It's really hard to uncreate it if they've created the wrong thing. So it's also going to give it your biggest bang for the buck in the project. The other thing is, and this will sound really stupid, but if you're running a project, research with users. Because so many times you go, oh, you can speak to this person. They know a user, or they know what users are like. Actually speak to users. And if your budget doesn't include, if you can, actually sending a user researcher to go and talk to an actual user, ideally in an actual place, then add some more to the budget.
Yeah. And it's so obvious when you say it like that.
You wouldn't believe it, though.
Yeah. Well, from a CIO perspective, I would say that I get chased the most. The conversation is, when are we getting the dev team in? When are we getting the extra developers and all the rest of it? Nobody's saying, we need to get this design right. We need to go around 3 or 4 times. We should get some user research in. And that's actually what people should be shouting. So I just want to say massive thanks to all of our guests, and also a huge thanks to everyone who's joining in now or watching this on replay. The next webinar we have is on Friday the 29th of September, and that's going to be called Exploring the Depths of Discovery. So, and obviously the discovery component, this is an important part of it, but getting into all the other components of discovery. And yeah, so please keep an eye out for the email, also with a feedback form. We'd love to hear anything you've got to say about the format of the show or anything else that you want to do. But for now, again, warm welcome. It was a warm thank you, to you guys. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Thank you.